Hello, I'm Richard D. Hall and I would like to show you some compelling new information about the September the 11th attacks on the World Trade Center. There is still much debate in the 9/11 truth movement about the events. Although it was not my intention, I believe what I am about to show you reconciles most of the different theories, such as the planes were not passenger planes, the planes were very small, and some even say there were no planes at all. The intention of this analysis was simply to find out the truth, and to my knowledge, this analysis has not been uncovered by any single individual or organization to date, August 2010. Before I start, a brief introduction about myself. I have a science background and I'm a qualified electrical and electronic engineer. I worked for large companies in industry, predominantly in the UK, on engineering projects for 16 years. I worked on the Trident nuclear program and on many other technologies. My main areas of expertise are in data communications, software design, and electronics. I recently watched an excellent film called September Clues by Simon Schach. This film gives a detailed analysis of the television coverage of 9/11. Once you have seen the analysis carried out by Schach, it is indisputable that most, if not all, of the images shown on TV were doctored in some way. Almost all video images screened, including the ones which appeared to have been filmed on camcorders by members of the public, had artificial composite plane images added to the footage. This is a very difficult fact for most people to take on board. To get clarification on this, I would recommend you watch the September Clues film. I have made a TV program about Simon Schach's film with Andrew Johnson, where we reanalyze some of the footage. For example, in this shot, we see the plane's nose emerge from the World Trade Center tower. This is physically impossible. Add to this the fact that if we reverse the tape, the plane does not appear in the wide-angle shot because it has only been inserted in the narrow shot. Also, there is evidence that a layer mask has been used, behind which the editors have tried to make the plane disappear. However, the position of the layer mask, which was intended to be behind the tower, drifts to the left due to the camera drift and reveals the damning evidence of their video fakery. Finally, because this shot was aired live, after they realized the errors in their production, they frantically fade the footage to black, but are too late to conceal their tricks. This is just one of many anomalies exposed in Simon Schach's film. We now come on to the main new analysis I have uncovered. On the day of 9/11, after the first alleged plane hit the north face of World Trade Center 1, the nation's news media were immediately alerted and had cameras fixed on the Twin Towers. Some of the networks were broadcasting live images as the second tower was struck. The fabricated live images you have just seen were from Fox News Channel, allegedly filmed from a helicopter. NBC were also broadcasting live. In their live footage, seconds before the strike on World Trade Center 2, what has been described as a ball comes into the shot on a seemingly straight path. This ball was not commented on by any of the presenters and has never been discussed on mainstream news. In NBC's live footage, the feed switches to a different camera about 4 seconds before the second impact.
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit.
Note that no plane is seen in any of NBC's live images. In this lower quality VCR recorded version, the camera does not switch, so we can see the resulting explosion. If we consider the path of the ball, it appears to be what causes the impact on World Trade Center 2. Both its trajectory and its speed show that it would have been at the point of impact at the time impact occurred. So we have just seen the footage which NBC broadcast live. Now let's compare that to what NBC showed on their evening news. This damning clip from September Clues shows that NBC were also using video fakery. The footage on the left is the live image, and on the right the evening news image. The sequences are synchronized and in slow motion. The images at first sight seem as though they are from totally different camera positions, but in fact they are not. By comparing the perspective of the towers, we can see that these two images are probably filmed by the same camera and certainly from the same position. They have in fact modified three aspects of the recorded live images to create the evening news images. Firstly, they have added a blue-grey tint to the image to make it seem different. Second, they have removed the entire background imagery of the river and New York skyline. And third, they have added a fake aeroplane which does not appear in the live shot. The evening news images are thus proven to have been faked. The footage of the ball, which is what we believe probably caused the impact on World Trade Center 2, is a key piece of evidence which until now has been overlooked and we will now examine. Let's go back and look at the live image of the ball as it comes towards the towers. We have increased the contrast and looped the sequence just to have a closer look. It certainly does not appear to be a plane, a helicopter, or even a missile. It is possible that the live footage from this angle at this time was not meant to be shown to the public. I now set about carrying out some detailed analysis of the trajectory path of the ball to see if anything more would come to light. The results, as you will see, are startling. The image we see is effectively two-dimensional, and the trajectory of the ball seems to come from above the towers. Using the information in this clip, I set about trying to find the actual three-dimensional path of the ball. I started by making some assumptions. Firstly, I assumed that the ball was travelling in a straight path. Secondly, I assumed the ball was travelling at fixed speed. And third, that the ball impacts on the south face of World Trade Center 2 in the position where the damage is caused. In order to work out a three-dimensional path, we need to find at least 2 points in space through which the object travelled. The first is simple. It is the impact point on Tower 2. In the footage, the ball is seen to disappear behind Tower 1, out of view. If I could determine the ball's exact position at this time, that would give a second point in space from which to determine the object's path. If we look at the camera's perspective, we can see Building 7 in the foreground. The left side of Building 7 appears roughly in the centre of Tower 2, and the right-hand side of Building 7 is slightly to the right of the edge of Tower 1. If we now look at an aerial plan of these buildings, we can draw a line showing the camera's line of sight. I determined that the camera was in fact positioned at approximately 4 degrees to the edge of the World Trade Centers. I continued the line, as the object must have been somewhere along that path at the point when it went behind Tower 1. I now needed another path to get an intersection point to determine the ball's position. There is much information on the internet about the damage to World Trade Center 2 and the possible angles of impact of the alleged plane. If I knew the angle the object hits the tower, I could draw a second line and thus determine the position of the ball. I examined very closely the damage to the towers and have marked on the tower the exact central point of impact. There was damage spread around the far corner of the tower at various locations, which correspond to different approach angles of the ball. In order to transfer the two-dimensional data onto a three-dimensional model, I used a 3D computer simulation package to make an exact 3D representation of the World Trade Center complex. What you see here is exactly dimensionally correct. The distance between the towers, the heights, widths and lengths are all entered in feet and inches to perfectly represent the situation. Once we have our 3D model, it is then possible to view the scene from any angle we wish. I also needed to create the ball, which I did by drawing a 50 feet wide disc-shaped object. In order to estimate the impact angle, I tried an angle of 15 degrees and then modeled this in 3 dimensions on the 3D model. But the resulting trajectory path, when compared to the TV images, was not steep enough. I then tried an angle of 21 degrees, which results in a steeper trajectory path and matches the TV footage. 21 degrees is a plausible impact angle, as there was significant damage at the back of the tower at this position. So I now had what I believed to be the correct trajectory path. I could then plot the intersection point of the... I estimated that the ball, as it disappeared behind the tower, was actually slightly lower than the height of the tower, because the camera is positioned very slightly above the height of the towers. The analysis showed that the ball was approximately 1,646 feet behind Tower 1 and 100 feet to the right of Tower 1 as it disappeared behind the World Trade Center. I could now add this trajectory path to the 3D model. I have drawn the ball in two locations along its path. The first is at the point as it disappears behind the tower, and the second is at the point of impact. We can now see clearly that the path looks rather different to that screened on TV. Now we can see it in 3 dimensions. I could now use the model to find further information about what happened. If we spin around to the north side of the towers, we can position ourselves where the NBC camera viewed the ball. Here we see the same trajectory path as viewed on TV. The next logical thing to do was to superimpose the TV images onto my 3D model, just to show I have the ball's path as close to the actual as possible. Here the camera angle is moving slightly, which makes the two a little difficult to line up, but we can see that the path is more or less correct. Again, we can use our 3D model to spin around to the other side of the towers and get a feel for the actual trajectory of the ball. I have also calculated the distance travelled between the point where the ball goes behind the tower and the impact point, which is 1,200 feet. And the ball took 3.7 seconds from that point to impact. That means the ball was travelling at approximately 221 miles per hour. I will come on to the trajectory path a little later, but the most interesting part of the findings is yet to come. Now that I had a 3D representation of the path of this mystery piece of hardware, I was able to view the approach of the object from any vantage point, from above the towers, from the ground, from anywhere. There is a famous piece of 9/11 footage known as the Hezekiah footage, and is probably the image most people still have impaled on their minds. This footage was filmed by Michael Hezekiah, an alleged member of the public, who handed his recording over to CNN, along with the rights to his footage. He has also been told by his lawyer that he should not talk to anyone relating to information about his filming of the event. I am not alone in believing that the plane in this clip has been added using video editing. The plane is very grey and uniform in colour, and looks like it has been picked out of a computer graphics stock image library. The added screams complete the effect. If the ball is indeed what caused the hole in the tower, then they would have had to remove the ball somehow from the clip. I spent time examining frames from this clip and could not see any remnants of the ball where it had been removed. I decided to use my 3D model, which includes the trajectory path of the ball, and overlay this on top of the Hezekiah footage. This was a eureka moment. It all became very clear what they have done. The plane's path in this clip is absolutely identical to my predicted ball flight path. When they have inserted the fake plane, they have inserted it such that the ball is in the center of the plane's hull, thus hiding the ball. In other words, they have used the fake plane to cover up the ball. Just to prove I have not just drawn this line to match the plane's path, I will zoom out and pan back round the towers to prove this is the ball's path. This means the plane's path we see in the Hezekiah footage is impossible, and lends weight to the fact it was probably inserted afterwards. Having looked at some of the other pieces of amateur footage, it seems likely that the conspirators have not just used this technique on the Hezekiah footage, but inserted planes on top of the ball in other clips, such as the Evan Fairbanks clip. Within the 9/11 Truth movement, there are theories about what appears to be a strange appendage underneath the alleged Flight 175. Here is a clip from a documentary where this appendage is discussed.
When I first saw the appendage on Flight 175, this extra piece of equipment, I was looking at the Evan Fairbanks footage, which is kind of bluish, and it's from the underneath. It's off-centered on the fuselage. It's between the engines. It casts its own shadow. It has its own reflection. And when I saw this, I thought somebody's had to have photoshopped this, and I wanted to get other sources to make sure that it wasn't just a product of Photoshop. It was in all the CNN footage when you took their videos and did freeze frames. It was definitely a three-dimensional piece of equipment. It definitely has nothing to do with Photoshop, and it shouldn't be there.
Anybody can see the other piece of equipment right there in the center line on the starboard side of that fuselage. It can't be anything other than an external piece of equipment.
All the recorded sources, all the different photographic evidence that was produced by CNN and ABC, they all show this pod. It's there. You can see it with your own eyes. And in my professional opinion, that there was a pod attached to the bottom of that aircraft, and therefore it was not United Airlines Flight 175.
Having watched this, you probably know and have worked out for yourself what I am going to say. This was a second eureka moment. What the people in this documentary are failing to see is that a pod was not added to the plane, but a fake plane was added to the pod, or the ball. What they are seeing when they see the pod is in fact the ball. Looking closely at the image, the size of the pod is approximately what I originally estimated the ball to be. You might think that when they have added the plane on top of the ball, that the ball should no longer be visible. Well, this depends on the type of video compositing used. When three-dimensional video compositing techniques are used, the software must choose what parts of the image to leave in, i.e. the foreground, and which parts to render on top of, i.e. the background. It is quite possible that the 3D plane was composited into the image, and the video software designated the moving ball as a second foreground object, thus did not completely disappear the ball behind the plane, and instead merged the two together. These composites were possibly done in a hurry to get them out onto our TV screens. I have recreated a Boeing 767 and inserted a ball inside. This looks remarkably similar to what was screened. In this 3D mock-up, the ball is 39 feet wide and 17 feet in height. If we now consider the object's path, the yellow triangle in this picture shows the most likely approach path towards the towers. We can see that it is above the water and know that it came down from above the height of the towers. It is only 39 feet in diameter, and the towers are 1/4 of a mile high. Even people who were watching the mayhem going on at the North Tower would probably not have noticed this object, and this is probably why the second attack was done in this way, to minimize the number of witnesses. Now, you might still have doubts about the fact that some people say they saw a plane. It is quite possible that some of these people were planted to lie about this to TV cameras. Some may have seen the ball and mistook it for a small plane. Others will have seen the events soon afterwards on television and possibly thought they saw it in real life. Andrew Johnson speaks here about his survey of 9/11 eyewitnesses.
When you look at those accounts, you find that only about 20% reported seeing the plane, only about 20% reported hearing the second plane as it came in, and of course this is after the first one, so everyone was actually aware that there was stuff going on, and only 8% of these 117 people I identified reported seeing and hearing the plane.
Okay.
A lot of them said, again, if you look at the accounts, I didn't know it was a plane until later. So, we start to raise questions about what actually caused the damage at the World Trade Center, what actually did it, what made the holes, and what caused the fireballs.
With regards to the first plane, we cannot really conclude whether or not another ball-type craft was used on Tower 1, as there is only one very dubious piece of footage of this. I would suspect it is likely that an identical object was used on the first tower. So in summary, what can we say about this mysterious craft? Firstly, it is smooth-edged, approximately 39 feet in diameter and 17 feet in height. It travelled from a southwest direction at 220 miles per hour at a descent angle of approximately 16 degrees and smashed into the South Tower. It does not look like a plane or a helicopter. There are no propellers or wings. It cannot be a balloon as it is travelling too fast. It is unlikely to be a conventional rocket or missile as it is moving too slow and the shape is inconsistent with any known missile. The American government are known to have engineered top-secret anti-gravity vehicles. The most likely explanation is that the ball was a top-secret, remote-controlled, anti-gravity propelled drone. My analysis provides yet further compelling evidence that 9/11 was an inside job orchestrated by American and Israeli intelligence agencies. Why would they use such a craft, you might ask? Well, using real cumbersome passenger airliners with real people on board would have presented a much greater risk of something going wrong, and many more agents would have been needed to carry out the operation. Why not just use their hidden advanced technology, a highly advanced, small, remotely controlled vehicle packed with explosives, and then let the video editors do the rest? 9/11 was the biggest PSYOP in human history. But why? Why would they do this? They did it to create a perception in the public mind that Western democracies are under attack from Islamic terrorists, so that the public and troops will support the government in invading countries which they wish to establish bases in, such as Iran and Afghanistan. Do not be duped by this fakery, and please spread the word.